Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where it's Super Bowl Sunday. Sunday, which means movie trailers. Although this year, Marvel is sitting out the big game. I saw one of you holding out hope. I mean, hey, you never know until the game's over, but it's not looking good for a new Marvel trailer, which I guess is understandable because, as we've discussed, Avengers Doomsday doesn't hit theaters until December. And Disney has a lot of other movies to promote. Surely they're hoping that The Mandalorian and Grogu is the big trailer of the night. They don't want to overshadow themselves. The Mouse and Universal are expected to drop the most trailers tonight, and a couple others sprinkled in there. And I'll be doing reactions, so I hope that you'll join me. And it's because of the Super Bowl and also the Winter Olympics. I mean, NBC and it's all on NBC, which is a number of people have pointed out is amazing. But by the way, with the Olympics, I want to give a shout out to Lindsey Vonn, who had a tragic and devastating wipeout this morning. And also, so because of all this going on, no big new movies hit theaters this weekend. There also, nobody knew this was going to happen, but there ended up being yet another huge weather event, this time a cold snap here in the Northeast at the very least. You know what it was this morning here in New York City? 4 degrees. 4! It's nuts. Okay, I've never experienced that here in New York City. But a couple of small movies opened, right? And we also have some interesting holdovers, so let's discuss. Now, last weekend, the big story was Hollywood Outsiders making a big splash at the box office. And both movies ended up being events, with people not just buying tickets to see the films, but to support the two individuals who starred. But while those movies had impressive openings, I think a lot of us were like, well, how are they going to do in their second weekend? Let's take a look. Both movies ended up dropping somewhere in the 60th percentile. Kind of high up in the 60th. Well, mid-range. And, it could have been worse. I think people would have thought both these movies probably would have dropped in the 70s. So 60s actually isn't bad when you think about it. And in fact, Iron Lung is still towards the top of the top 10. So that's very impressive. And we have a few more details about YouTuber Mark Fishback's journey. He did approach the studios, but when they asked for more creative control, he couldn't agree to that. But he did, I think not only in the making of the film, but how it would be marketed, etc. But he did have to agree to a 50-50 split with theaters to get the film into theaters himself. By the way, it usually ends up being a 50-50 split by the end, but, this movie is obviously very front-loaded, and typically the distributor gets the majority of the ticket sales up front, and then only after a period of time does the ratio start to shift in favor of the exhibitor as an incentive to keep the movie in theaters. So up front, the 50-50 split is unusual. But, also, Fishback has said that he's going to split the money that he makes off this movie with his crew, which is very commendable. A little Taylor Swift action there, it seems. She doesn't split the money. But she hands out considerable bonuses, which just goes to show how much money she's making. But, Fishback's making a lot of money too. He's going to probably get 50%. The movie's probably going to end up somewhere around 40 million by the end. So that's like 18 to 20 million going to him. And there was just a $3 million budget for this movie and almost no advertising. So the next question is, speaking of Spaceballs' joke about the search for more money, right? Will Iron Lung go the traditional Hollywood route of digital release, then pay 1 window, pay 2 window, and only then does it go to streaming? Or will Mark Fishback go and put the movie right up on his YouTube channel right away? He might even do it for free because for him, this is, not been about, the business aspect of it so much. It turns out that he didn't even plan to put this in theaters, but it was his fans' request. And I think that's very nice. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But I want to point out also to you that there was a very interesting editorial in Deadline from a producer, not a particularly well-known producer, but he wrote a good editorial. I'll put the link down below. And he talked about one of the major problems that a lot of people aren't focusing on with the potential Netflix acquisition of Warner Brothers. So even if Netflix honors the theatrical release, The problem is that after that movie plays in theaters, it will go directly to Netflix, bypassing the digital release, pay one and pay two windows before it hits streaming. And that would lose billions of dollars for the movie business. And that is a real concern. So I think that's very interesting. Now, speaking of changing the game, has Fishback changed the game? Well, yes and no. So Fishback has said that when he pitched to studios, they didn't take him very seriously because he was a YouTuber. And I definitely think that will change. But I don't think the studios will stop asking for creative control, both in the process of making the film and how it's released. And I have to say, based on some of the things I've heard about Iron Lung, I think it probably would have benefited, at least creatively, from some advice from the studio. But I also think, on the other hand, that the success of Iron Lung is less about Fishback's filmmaking abilities and more about the relationship that he's built with his audience, right? And that is something that is very unique to YouTube creators, and also I think to Twitch. For instance, I love being able to interact with you guys, not just in the comments, but on the live streams. I really feel connected to you guys. And that is something, Hollywood has had a lot of conversations lately about how important it is for talent to have a social media following. But this is on a whole new level. There's an interactedness, again, as I just said, that is not in a Twitter/X or Instagram following. Although I do think some people go live on Instagram, but it's different. Although at the same time, can an actor have that kind of a close relationship with their fans and still be considered an actor? I don't think people did compliment Fishback's acting skills. His fans thought it was pretty good, but I don't know if anybody would feel like he was now an actor or whatever, think of him in that way. I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to have for sure, but there's real value he's shown in this new level of a relationship, between creator and those who enjoy what that person creates. Now, on that note, very, very few creators have the following that Fishback does, right? He has almost 40 million subscribers on YouTube and even more on other platforms. And so if you remember last week, the trade said that if Melania opened with 7 million, that means it sold about 600,000 tickets. So if Iron Lung ends around 40 million, that means he sold 3.5 million tickets. And again, he has 40 million followers. So that's just a sliver of his followers. That's all he had to get into the theaters to get this amazing result. We'll see if and how Fishback builds on this. If he's able to, if he wants to, we'll see. But I think that Iron Lung is certainly going to be an influence on the industries, Hollywood and YouTube and Twitch. And I also think this touches on the video game space as well, is having undeniable continued growth in the entertainment space. I was going to say mainstream, but I'm sure a lot of you would be like, video games are mainstream. And I think considering their scale, they certainly are. But they haven't been in the pop culture space, I think, but I think that's changing rapidly. It's a little like comic books, although that's not a totally fair comparison because comic books have just a sliver of the audience that video games do. And also video games, by the way, are more interactive, which is, I think interaction is very key. And I think you're going to see that changing a lot as Hollywood moves forward. Isn't that interesting? I think that's something that Hollywood's going to have to figure out how they can do as well. That's very interesting. But Iron Lung, of course, as many of you know, is based on an independent video game. All right, so how about Melania? Look, we all know that Melania is not a real movie. It's a political statement, and it's also an exchange of money between Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos. But we also have to note that it has performed very well for a documentary. And if it had a normal, non-suspicious budget for a documentary, it would be considered a box office success. Up until now, theatrically released documentaries have either focused on nature or musical performances, but perhaps this might be the beginning of a trend with political documentaries going to theaters. But what kind of political documentaries? It's hard to tell because the far left isn't as into propaganda as the far right. And also the far left is very well served by Hollywood, whereas the far right has not had a lot of incentive to head to the theater, particularly over the last few years. And that's why I think Hollywood finds itself so much in the political conversation these days. Like Iron Lung, the next question is, will Melania go directly to Prime Video or go the more traditional route through the Hollywood Gauntlet? Based on Amazon's statement that they released for Melania's second weekend, because there's been a lot of talk about Melania's box office and they're trying to defend it. They're like, this is the real movie. And everyone's like, come on. But I thought what was interesting was they did not only said that it seems that it's going to go directly to Prime Video. They're not going to make any money off of this. And I doubt, considering how much the Trumps got for the documentary, because, Trump loves to sell stuff online, but I don't think they would get a cut going forward probably. So I think it'll be trying to, just like consider like a nice move to the people who are interested in Melania to just make it available with your subscription. But here's what's crazy. They said they're going to go ahead with the docu-series about Melania Trump. Like they're going to continue with this. And I would say to that, well, actually, I would say the Washington Post says, be careful, Amazon, because go look at what has happened to the Washington Post. All right. Meanwhile, Send Help continues to be the #1 movie, but it can't drive any conversation in the face of Iron Lung and Melania. The movie is at a little over 50 million worldwide, and it's so behind Drag Me to Hell overseas that I thought maybe it hadn't opened overseas because of the Olympics, but in fact it has. It's just doing very poorly overseas, whereas Drag Me to Hell did much better. Maybe it's still because of the Olympics. I don't know. But again, it's going to go and run the gauntlet. And Disney's very good at that. They're the strictest at adhering to the theatrical window and waiting and going all the way down the line until they finally get to Disney Plus. And it's worked very well for them. But Disney largely releases blockbusters. So I'm curious to see how they handle a smaller movie like this. Ella McKay moved real fast. And I suspect that Send Help, of course, isn't that level of a disaster. But this is a very small movie for Disney. And I think that it will move a little faster through that gauntlet, but run it all the same. And, the idea is to get paid again and again for the same product in different spaces. And that's how some of these smaller movies end up recouping their expenses, which allows Hollywood to experiment and take risks. As for the rest of the top 10, Angel Studios had another breakthrough. They've done very well with animation. They had another animated hit during the holidays. And now with their first real mainstream star, Kevin James, they have a very respectable opening for Solo Mio and great audience scores. I checked out the trailer for this, and I think it does look pretty good. This isn't something I'd want to see in theaters, but I could definitely see myself checking it out on digital and down the line. Thus, the gauntlet. And K-pop shows no signs of slowing down with Stray Kids' concert film. I've never even heard of Stray Kids. Have you? But it did surprisingly well in theaters for something that I think most of us have never heard of. It's like BTS light, but like super light. All right, Luc Besson, though, and the Strangers franchise, well, they can't be happy with these performances. Meanwhile, Disney continues to make money with Zootopia 2 and Avatar Fire and Ash, enjoying yet again the smallest drops in the top 10. Zootopia 2 is within striking distance of joining the $2 billion club. Isn't that amazing? While Avatar is about to hit $1.5 billion. I wonder how long it'll take for us to find out if they're going to move ahead with those fourth and or fifth movies. And then Pillion, which finally hit North American theaters. A lot of you overseas have been like, this movie's been around forever. You guys already saw it. And in fact, it's been in the press since before the holidays. But that has worked to really pique interest. And with just 4 theaters, it delivered a very nice per theater average of $60K. Did you brave the weather this weekend to see any of these movies or pull yourself away from the Olympics or the Super Bowl? If you haven't, and you haven't seen them yet, when do you plan to watch these movies, if ever? Do you see the value in the gauntlet, right, that Hollywood has set up for movies? Hollywood suffered a huge blow just a couple of years ago with the loss of physical media sales. I mean, physical media is still around, but it is, of course, not the revenue generator that it used to be. Matt Damon has a great little masterclass on this on Hot Ones that I'm sure many of you have seen. But Hollywood managed to recover with streaming, and perhaps something else will come along if they have to lose the gauntlet. It pains me to say it, because there must be a reason they took them away from them in the first place. But maybe the answer is studios need to own theaters, right? Netflix owns some theaters, in fact. So they don't have to rely so heavily on making money at the theater, right? It's more of a prestige thing. It's something to make talent happy, like, very much like what Netflix does. And, maybe because it's their own product, they'll do a better job with the presentation. I mean, for all their crying, theaters still don't always provide the best experience, as Donna Langley over at Universal called them out for at CinemaCon last year, right? Because, with theater owners, it's their only business. They have to make money, whereas studios could take a little bit of a hit to launch something and count it maybe as advertising for when it goes down the line. What do you think would be the way to potentially save movie theaters, assuming you want to? On that note, let's head over to streaming, starting with Nielsen as usual, this time for the second week of January, where The Pit proved that HBO Max shows can chart. Yes, with the debut of season 2, this weekly released show not only charted, but made the overall chart, which is extremely impressive, making it as hot a show for HBO as Game of Thrones, the Game of Thrones franchise, and The Last of Us. Even The White Lotus, while that charted on the originals chart, had a hard time getting on the overall. Why do you think The Pit is able to chart, whereas Peacemaker, Penguin, and Derry struggled? This is fascinating to me. And again, that it does so as a weekly. Although it does, of course, have the first season available as a binge. But, even the first season of The Pit was charting, as you might recall last year. Stranger Things and Landman, still dominating. I love Landman so much. It's such a good show. While Netflix, His and Hers, hits Nielsen quite impressively. And yep, Fallout is genuinely a hit. On the originals chart, we have some reality hits with Peacock's The Traitors. I never watched an episode of The Traitors before. I've seen all the buzz. But I was at someone's house on Thursday and they wanted to watch The Traitors. They're like, I'm sorry, but I watch The Traitors every week. I can't miss it. And I was like, okay. And at first I was like, I can't believe I'm watching this. Oh my God, this is such trash. But by the end, I was all in. I was like, this show is great. No wonder everybody loves it. And I will be watching this Thursday. I now have a little block of programming with The Traitors and Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. We all have our vices. All right, and then also you can see another YouTuber, Mr. Beast, with season 2 of Beast Games. Percy Jackson season 2 rounds out this top 10. As for movies, Tom Blythe is keeping his career alive with People We Meet on Vacation. Wasn't looking so good there for a minute. He had Hunger Games, but he hasn't really been able to capitalize on that. And then, of course, they recast him for the next one and jumped to Ralph Fiennes. All right, and then Tron Ares, right? These numbers are so bad, even though Tron's not a very big franchise, unfortunately. It's very niche. But these numbers are so bad, I really do think Jared Leto is the issue. And so we'll see if that turns out to be a real problem for Masters of the Universe as well, where he is just doing the voice for Skeletor. But everybody knows it. For those of you who skipped Tron Ares because of Jared Leto, what's your position on Masters of the Universe? With Netflix's charts for just last week, Bridgerton is back with season 4, and while it's about 5 to 6 million views less than season 3's debut back in 2024, still a big hit, still doing very well. And speaking of big hits, His and Hers is still doing very well. It's 4th week out. And then I find this absolutely fascinating. Skyscraper, even though it's no longer live, still got a lot of people to tune in its 2nd week. That's amazing. Did you watch Skyscraper? Not live? And how is it, it's a little morbid, the idea of doing it live, like what could happen. But, what made you tune in after the fact? Meanwhile, Stranger Things 5 dropped from 5th place last week to 9th place this week, almost out of the top 10. I don't think it's going to be able to catch up to Stranger Things 4 on the all-time chart. It's 13.5 million views behind still. I mean, it could get there. But I mean, hey, I do think there was a hit to the franchise with this final season, and I'll be curious to see how these spin-offs that they're launching perform. I don't think people reacted too well to the animated trailer that dropped, particularly because it's a prequel with the same characters, and people are like, how can these incredible things be happening and yet never be referenced in the future seasons? It's the typical problem with prequels. I think the best course of action for Stranger Things would be to take like a 5-year break or longer and then bring back the original cast to play actual adults. I think that would work. I think I think people would come back. No, I think there would be the time heals all wounds. I mean, Star Wars is sure hoping so. And then also the idea of the return of the original cast. I still think it would benefit Harry Potter to bring back the original cast. But what do you think? Do you think that Stranger Things has a future, if any? And what do you think that future is? All right, with movies, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are still on top for the third week. Well, K-Pop Demon Hunters is back in the top 3 in week 33 in the top 10 on Netflix. That's amazing. I think it might be there forever. Maybe, I would say not when the second movie hits, but we often see the second project or the next project bringing the last one back up. So it's amazing. I wonder how long it can stay in the top 10. Do you think it could be forever? All right, over on digital with Apple's charts, sure enough, The Housemaid is killing it on digital, as we knew it would. This is the Gauntlet, the Hollywood Gauntlet in action. And it's still in theaters. While Zootopia 2 also is still in theaters and does very well on digital. Plus, Hamnet has found an audience on digital, which I think is interesting because it certainly wasn't able to find one in theaters. And good for Daisy Ridley and Brenton Thwaites. He's still around. They're both still around. Well, they made this movie back in 2024, but finally you can watch it. And it did pretty well on digital, although that audience score, that's pretty rough. As for this coming weekend, after what's been a bit of a break, Hollywood returns with a vengeance because this is quite the weekend. We've got Valentine's Day on a Saturday, and then Monday is President's Day, which makes it a holiday weekend. Wuthering Heights, of course, is the big movie. And can it match previous Valentine's Day blockbusters like Deadpool, which opened with about 150, and 50 Shades of Grey, which opened with around 90? I think it might be able to get close to 50 Shades. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been checking out ticket sales, and it looks like it's already very difficult to get a ticket on Valentine's Day to see Wuthering Heights, even on regular screens. Do you have your tickets yet? This is going to be interesting. The review embargo lifts tomorrow, Monday, at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and my review will be ready. So be sure to subscribe so you know when it goes up. Crime 101, which is splitting premium screens with Wuthering Heights, Goat and Good Luck, Have Fun, etc., also hits theaters. On digital on Tuesday, we've got Primate, and then with streaming, Netflix has a new Tyler Perry movie on Friday. Then, of course, again, tonight is the Super Bowl with not just a trailer palooza. Be sure to join me for those reactions, but also, of course, all eyes are on Bad Bunny to see what he does for his halftime show. Then, speaking of shows, Peacock, which has done very well with binge drops, has another one today, The Burbs. And The Artful Dodger returns to Hulu on Tuesday. Cross returns to Prime Video on Wednesday. And so does Love is Blind on Netflix, also on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, Ryan Murphy is at it again. And remember, Ryan Murphy is one of the top business relationships that Dana Walden brought with her from Fox, which has made her a big player at Disney and why she ended up getting so close to the top position. But he's at it again with a love story, this time focusing on JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. And then on Friday, Josh Safdie, hot off of Marty Supreme, although now with a little controversy, well, he has Neighbors debuting on HBO. That's kind of like a little bit of a docuseries feel to it. We'll see how that does. Has the little bit of a scandal around, well, maybe a big scandal around Safdie changed how you feel about him at all? And that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And again, tonight's the Super Bowl. Who are you rooting for, both in terms of teams and in terms of trailers? Share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.